This lesson will introduce you to the relative clause. Now, a relative clause is a part of a sentence. It's a clause, which means that it's going to have its own subject and verb that's going to relate to another noun. It describes a noun. Now, the examples here I've given you. I see a man who knows Greek. Who knows Greek is the relative clause. Who is what we call the relative pronoun. And it describes man. And man in this sentence is what we call the antecedent. Now, in this relative clause, who is the subject. Who knows Greek, right? The man knows Greek. So the relative pronoun is the subject of the sentence, of the clause. Not of the sentence. The subject sentence is I. We are people who know Greek. Okay, so who again is a relative pronoun. It refers to the antecedent people, and in this case again, who is the subject of the clause. In the sentence, Greek is the language that we are learning. That is our relative pronoun. It's referring to language. Language is the antecedent. And in this clause, that is accusative. It's the direct object of we are learning. So we are the subject here. What are we learning? That. That is the language. And finally, Greek is a language in which the case determines the function of the noun. Which is the relative clause, or relative pronoun. It's referring again to language, but in this case, it's the object of the preposition in. So in Greek, we put this in the dative case. So what we're going to start out with is just how to form in Greek the relative pronouns, the who, whose, whom, which, that of Greek. And then we'll talk a little bit more about using it. So to form the relative pronoun, first thing you should notice, they all contain rough breathings. And they all contain accents. This is important because in, say, the first person's, the feminine nominative, hey, if it were just hey with no accent, this would be the article. In fact, what you'll notice is in most cases, it is the article minus the tau. But in the nominative singular, we have hos, hey, ho. Ho, the article would be to. Let's knock off the tau, add a rough breathing, and you get ho. In the genitive, who, heis, who. If we looked at the genitive article, to, well, we knock off the tau, add a rough breathing, and we've got the relative pronoun. So, who is whose. Feminine heis, who. Ho, hey, ho. Well, same thing here. To would be the article. Let's add a rough breathing instead of a tau, and you've got the article. Hon, hey, ho. In the plural, hoi, hi, ha. Right, so here we're just accenting the article. So hoi becomes hoi. Hi, the article becomes hi. And ha from ta without the tau. Hon, hon, hon. Hois, heis, hois. Hus, has, ha. Right, so remember this rule. It's the article minus the tau, except for the nominative masculine and feminine, singular, and plural. All right, now how do we use these? Well, there's some rules. The gender and number of the relative pronoun, so that hos, hey, ho, so the relative pronoun, the gender and number, right, so whether we're going to be in this column, or this column, whether we're singular or plural, that will be determined, that will be the same as its antecedent. And this makes sense. If you think about in this sentence, I know the woman whose car this is, well, woman and whose point to the same person in reality, so they have to be the same gender and number. Right, so gender and number refers to reality and have to be the same. So whose is going to be feminine and singular. If I said men who love sports are interesting, who and men refer to the same thing, they're going to have to be masculine and plural. The woman who I saw at the store is my mother. The woman and who refer to the same person, it has to be singular and feminine. Right? So the gender and number of the relative pronoun will be the same as the antecedent. Second rule, the case of the relative pronoun will be determined by its use in the relative clause. I know the woman whose car this is. Right? So whose possessing the car, because whose is possessing the car, that is going to be in the genitive. So if we thought about it, okay, well, it's feminine singular genitive, we would use heis. And we'd use heis even though woman in this case is the direct object, the accusative. Right? So the relative pronoun and the antecedent will not necessarily be in the same case. Now the final rule is when you see a relative pronoun, a relative clause has started. So use the relative pronoun as a marker. Sometimes you have to jump back. You have to say, oh, well, there's actually a preposition like en ho, in which. But once you see this relative clause, you know, hey, the relative pronoun, you know you're in a relative clause, whether there's a pronoun or not, or whether a preposition or not, and then continue on until you get a complete idea. It will not stop until it's finished, and by finished, it's a complete idea. So let's look at some examples. Here are three. Hoi anthropoi. This should be hoi with no accent, because this is the article. Hoi anthropoi, hoi ente kome eisen, tus polemius diokusin. There's our relative pronoun. So as I'm reading, I see the men, and relative pronoun, I'm going to mentally, and you can do this either mentally or physically, put a bracket there. Who, and I see it's nominative, so it's going to be the subject. I know it's masculine and plural because it refers to men. So the men who in the village are. Okay, who are in the village? That's a complete idea. Great, I can stop my clause. So the men who are in the village, and now we jump back. What did the men do? They pursue the enemy. What about this sentence here? Ho nautes, ho, the sailor, ho, all right, we've got a relative pronoun. It's masculine and singular because nautes is masculine and singular. It's dative, so that means, when I think about it, it's probably going to be an indirect object. To whom? The food I give. I provide food to him, right? So the sailor, to whom I provide food. Now I can jump back out. Is grateful. Karen eke. So the main sentence is the sailor is grateful. This clause is describing the sailor. Hoi gigantes hus apectenon uk hoia te esan fugen. Hoi gigantes, the giants. Hus, relative clause. Relative pronoun. I know a relative clause is starting. Hus is masculine and plural because gigantes is masculine and plural. But hus in form is accusative, so it must be the direct object. Hus apectenon, whom I was killing. Now we can find out about these giants. Giants whom I was killing were not able to flee. Uk hoia te esan fugen. So, when you're coming across these, if you see a relative pronoun, if you need to, use brackets. And end the bracket when you have a complete idea. The case will determine how it's being used in the clause, not in the whole sentence, but in the clause. And it'll be the same gender and number as its antecedent.